Yes, I'm Batman.
I'm Batman. I'm Batman, Alfred.
I'm Batman.
I am Batman.
I'm Batman. I'm Batman.
Greetings, Bat Family. Welcome back to Holy BatCast, brought to you by Real Fans for Real Movies. Make sure you visit our website, holybatcast.com. It is your one-stop shop for all things Holy BatCast. You can also find us all over social media on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Just search for Holy BatCast and you will find us. We are on Patreon, so if you love the show and want to help support the show, you can do that through Patreon, patreon.com/holybatcast. You don't have to do it, but if you do it, we love you just that much more. So big thank you to everybody who does that. We appreciate it. We're a part of the Real Fans Podcast Network, so if you want to check out some other shows, you can do that at rf4rm.com. Lots of geeky talk. Most of it's about movies, let's be honest. But rf4rm.com is where you can go for all of that good stuff. And then, as always, I'm your host, Andy DiGenova. Hello. And if you'd like to follow me, you can do that on Twitter or on Instagram. It's just my name, Andy DiGenova. Now, this episode, we're going to be discussing something kind of random, but we love that. In celebration of the Aquaman movie, we're going to look back to another one of Aquaman's live-action appearances in the 2006 TV pilot that never aired, but is readily available. So joining me for that is the Garth to my Calder. It's Jamie Drewley. Hey, Jamie.
Oh, I think we're Aqua people tonight. I like it.
Yeah. I mean, it's another Aquaman-centric episode, and so I thought I would choose two characters, neither of which appear in the pilot we're discussing.
Makes perfect sense.
It makes so much sense. Anyway,
I'd also like to take this moment to welcome everybody back to Holy Forager Cast, because, God, that guy's awesome.
I've gotten further on the Young Justice Outsiders, and yes, Forager is awesome. And our pal Jay Yaws, he sent the comic book, and I didn't know that Forager was Bug. So I had heard of Bug, and I had seen that comic before. I just had no idea it was the same character.
I didn't either, because I'm not aware of a character named Bug. So
the more you know. And yeah, once he said that, I was like, oh yeah, I've seen that before. I just didn't realize that was the same as Forager. So good to know. Thank you, Jay Yaws, you big comic book nerd. We appreciate your knowledge.
That cat is a two-legged encyclopedia. I'm telling you, I can't get a thing past him when it comes to comics, and I love that about him. That's
good. You need that. We need those people, as long as they're nice about it.
Right.
And he is. He's a nice fella. So yeah, the more I learned about Forager, so that was cool. And I have been watching more Young Justice Outsiders, and man, it's so good. I watched a couple more today. I tweeted it out, but there is an episode, and I don't think this is spoilery. There's an episode where there's like a side mission with Robin, Spoiler, Orphan, and Arrowette. Is that right? Arrowette?
I think so.
In Gotham. Stalking the Mad Hatter and Clayface, and I was like, this can just be its own show. I would just watch this as a spin-off. Young Justice Gotham, I would watch the hell out of that.
It's so good. Even the stuff that feels like it isn't related to, the grand story. Again, this is a huge strength of the show for me, is the individual episodes work so well just by themselves because of stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, the long form story that they're telling, I mean, obviously that's still relevant to everything that they're doing for the most part, but those little short snippets there, because the Lobo episode, I mean, those, you can just watch those by themselves and just enjoy the heck out of them and not particularly be all that lost, I don't think.
Yeah, I think so. As long as you know who the players are, I think you can jump in and just enjoy it. But you're right, there is still an overarching story. And I finally got to the point where they called out much more clearly who Geoforce's sister was, and I was like, oh, like now I get it. But yeah, I had not thought about it prior to that, and when you told me, I was like, God, am I that dense? And literally the next episode was where they're like, oh, we're looking for your sister Tara, and I went, oh, duh, okay.
I assumed everybody knew that. I mean, I'm not trying to say I'm smarter than anybody else. I just assumed that was like just a quick Easter egg, and I'm like, oh, that's Tara. That's who Tara is going to evolve from, or whatever. I mean, I don't know why I picked up on that, and apparently a lot of other people didn't, because I was talking to somebody else today. He's like, I have a theory about who that is. I'm like, I'm just going to be quiet now and let it play out because, semi-spoilers in the most recent episode, it's no longer unclear in the least, but, that's cool.
Well, if she shows up, I haven't seen that yet, but like I just literally, they made it a plot point in the next episode where it's like, oh, I'm looking for my sister Tara. And I went, oh,
yeah.
okay. And that was like episode 6. It was so.
I watched these in the blocks in which they released. So this morning I got up at whatever it was, about 6:00, I guess it was. Nope, I'm sorry. That was yesterday after work. I watched them. And I watched all 4 of them right in a row because they released 4 this week instead of 3. So for me, the episodes tend to kind of run together a little bit. Like I'll have a hard time telling you which episode it happened in that I watched. I can just tell you like which week it happened, more or less.
Got it.
I'm terrible about that sort of thing. But anyway, yeah, it's not a mystery anymore as of this week.
Right. So anyway, I'm still loving Young Justice Outsiders. That's good. But I got more Calder, which made me very happy. So you told me it was coming and it came and I'm very glad. So
I get the distinct feeling that as the season goes on, he's going to become more and more prominent in the episodes. It's just right now everybody's kind of back burner to Grayson and Connor and that team that's rolling around with the new folks. So
right. But they still, I'm getting to the point where now they are starting to check in with everyone else, and I love that. I think that's awesome.
Absolutely.
But speaking of Aqua people, we're going to talk about Aquaman. And before we get to the pilot, I want to talk to you about the movie because it hit another milestone this weekend. Aquaman is now the highest grossing DC film of all time. It surpassed The Dark Knight Rises, and it's at $1.09 billion, and it still hasn't come out in Japan yet. So,
and still got pretty healthy legs in the U.S. and Asian markets, from what I understand.
Yeah, it only dropped 28% in the domestic market this weekend, which is a great hold, especially for now that it's been out for 6 weeks or so. So yeah, he just keeps going, and it looks like at this point it does look like Aquaman will outgross Suicide Squad domestically, and will probably squeak past Batman versus Superman. I mean, worldwide, it's already gone past all of those. But as far as domestic, it seems like
remember, domestically, it's tanking.
I've heard that, but domestically, it is a safe bet that it's going to pass Suicide Squad, and yeah, at this point, it also looks like Batman versus Superman. So that means that domestically, it will be second only to Wonder Woman.
I mean, if you honestly believe those kind of numbers that this thing has already turned out is not anything but a success, I can't help you at all.
Well, and more fun news is, and it was kind of like non-news, but everybody ran it anyway because it was still something. But Deadline ran the news that Warner Brothers has put the sequel in development, which, duh, of course they would. And James Wan is interested as long as the script is great. And so basically they're working on it, and it seems like they want James Wan back, and sounds like James Wan is interested in coming back. And so it's just a matter of all those pieces coming together to make it happen.
I mean, at this point, I don't see why any of them would have a reason not to, other than a subpar product. So I'm all for this idea and in favor of Wan being able to dictate what is and isn't right for him to do.
Yeah,
I think he's earned that. I think he's more than earned that.
He's apparently taking a break, as well he should. But
no, I mean, for me, and look, I know we're all anxious to get as much content as we can get. I mean, that's just the nature of us fans. We can never get enough. We're greedy, and there's not anything particularly wrong with that. But for my case, I can't speak for anybody else. If it takes 4 years to get this thing on a screen, so be it. I'd rather take 4 years to have it done right and correctly than I would for them to rush it to try and do it in 2 and turn out something that's not up to the level that we as fans want.
Of course, yeah. Don't rush it. Wait for James Wan. Get the script right. There's plenty of other things to keep us busy until then. So, but it's good news nonetheless. super excited about the milestone that Aquaman hit. That is amazing. And is only, good news for Warner Brothers. It's good news for the DC films. It's good news for James Wan. It's good news for us as fans.
Hear, hear.
So because of that, we were trying to figure out what to talk about this week. And as I now like to do, because it's so readily available, is I just kind of look at DC Universe, the app, and go, is there anything on here that might be worth discussing on the podcast? And they have conveniently put something on that app that I was like, well, that's perfect in honor of Aquaman. They put the 2006 pilot of the Aquaman proposed television show that unfortunately never happened. And so it's right there on the app, readily available. It is also on iTunes. Like, this one has been officially released, so it's not like one of those bootleg things. Even though it never aired, at least not in the United States, Warner Brothers has put it out and made it readily available. And so I was like, well, it'd be kind of fun to go back, turn back the clock 12, 13 years and see what that live action Aquaman was going to be before we got the movie that we did that is so successful now. So we looked back at the Aquaman 2006 pilot, and Jamie, had you ever seen this before?
I had, because it got released with, it was one of the bonus feature things on, was it Crisis on Two Earths? Or
that sounds right.
One of the animated films from that, DC animated era. I mean, I'm almost sure it was Crisis on Two Earths that had that on the front of it. So yes, I had seen it before because of that, but I'd only watched it the one time when that was first released, whenever that was, probably 8 or 9 years ago anyway now, isn't it?
Yeah, at least.
So anyway, I'd seen it there, and I had foggy memories of the beginning and everything else, but I didn't recall a lot about the episode. So today was the first time in probably close to a decade that I'd seen it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know I watched it before, and I don't know if it was on that, because it was an extra on that, or if it was because I had a bootleg before it was readily available, but I had seen it before, but only once. I'd watched it one time, and so I remembered little bits and pieces, but it was fun to revisit it. And again, I love that it's available on DC Universe. Like, that's one of the great things about the streaming service, is that they can just drop stuff like that maybe a lot of fans haven't seen on the app, and you can just watch it and see what might have been. So I love that it's just so readily available.
I think that's really cool of them to do that, and I hope it gets enough positive feedback that the likes of the Adrian Palicki Wonder Woman pilot gets put on there, or anything else that is along those lines that we don't have really good solid access to on home video and other formats.
Right. Have you seen the Adrian Palicki Wonder Woman pilot?
I have not.
Okay.
I have not heard a tremendous amount of positives about it, but I'd still love to watch it out of pure curiosity, if nothing else.
I've seen it. I own a copy. I would like to discuss it on the show.
Okay.
I seem to like it more than almost everyone else. So
send me a VHS.
I will. Oh God, I'll have to dub another VHS tape for another one of you people. But yeah, like, I feel like I like it more than almost every other fan who has seen it. I didn't love it, but I remember being like, I'd watch this show. So
I remember a lot of people telling me that had seen it, that some creative choices were made, that they were really puzzled as to why they were made. But,
right.
I think you can say that about any superhero TV show. I mean, I can say that about any one of the DC TV shows running right now, with the possible exception of Black Lightning. And even there, I can probably make a few of them. So,
well, and here's the thing about that, and it's actually a great segue into what the Aquaman pilot is that when you're setting up a TV show as opposed to a movie, you have to have a lot of pieces on the board to play with. And so there are weird creative decisions that they make, but it's because they know they need to feed storylines for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years if you're Smallville. And so they have to make some different choices in order to add grist for the mill so they could keep churning out stories.
Sure.
And so I think that is why a lot of those choices in the Wonder Woman pilot were made, and a lot of the choices in this Aquaman pilot were made that way too, because you see that, you go, oh, okay, that character, I don't know why that character is there, but I can see that, it puts forth a mystery that they can explore all season long or even into next season or something like that. So before we get ahead of ourselves, though, like now that you've revisited the Aquaman pilot, it's 13 years old. We are going to speak freely. We're going to talk spoilers. I think you're fine, folks. But if you got the DC Universe app, check it out. And even if you don't have the DC Universe app, for all our international friends, again, it's readily available. I mean, check the iTunes in your territory. It should be there for like $1 or $2. So it shouldn't be hard to find this pilot. But we're going to speak freely. So Jamie, now that you've revisited it, what do you think of this 2006 pilot?
First and foremost, I just want to say, how did this show not get picked up?
I asked myself the same question, and I did a little research, and I can tell you whenever you're ready.
Well, please, by all means, let's start with that, because I'm very curious.
Because I felt the same way. I was like, this sort of feels like a no-brainer. Whether or not the show would have succeeded or not, who knows? But just watching the pilot, it does feel like it should have been picked up. And I remember back in 2006 when they were making this pilot, I remember it was a big deal. People were talking about it while it was getting made. There was buzz around it. And so it was a foregone conclusion that it would get picked up. Everybody just assumed, oh yeah, of course it's going to get picked up. But apparently what happened is this pilot was made right when the WB and UPN merged to create the CW.
Okay.
And when the two channels merged, they couldn't take everything that was in development, and Aquaman got lost in the shuffle.
That's a damn shame.
Yeah. So it had nothing to do with the quality of the pilot. It had nothing to do with whether or not, people wanted the show. But it just was really bad timing was when they created the CW, and there just wasn't room for it. Isn't that crazy?
That's sad. I mean,
yeah.
Clearly it's one of those wasn't meant to be things, but at the same time, there was no real competition for superhero live action TV during that era. So it's not like it would have got lost in the shuffle of 7 or 8 other shows that were playing, like what the scenario that we've kind of got now. And to me, high level thoughts, I think this was a really high quality, well done episode of a TV show. I don't really have a tremendous amount of complaints about this that I couldn't levy against 24 other TV shows that I've watched in the span of time since this was made to now. Mm-hmm. I think it's incredibly well done. And here's a funny thing. I had this discussion with another friend today. Do you by chance watch This Is Us?
No.
Okay. Well, the show's fantastic,
but I know that Justin Hartley's on it.
Yeah, I'm not going to say you need to watch it, but my wife and I love the show. My daughters have gotten into watching the show with us to the point where if they walk in the room and my wife and I are 10 minutes into the episode, they're mad that we didn't wait for them. So my household loves this show. My son's not into it because nobody blows up or anything like that. He's in that phase now. But anyway,
Did you tell him that Aquaman's in it?
No.
Did that help?
No, I didn't tell him. I didn't tell him Green Arrow was in it either, but. The point I was trying to make is when I first started watching that show about 3 or 4 episodes into season 1, I kept looking at Hartley, and I didn't recognize him by his name, and I didn't exactly recognize him by his appearance. All I kept thinking to myself was, this cat is statuesque. I don't know how somebody has not snatched him up for a superhero movie yet. So then I went on the IMDb and
he should play a superhero, or maybe 2.
This is Green Arrow from Smallville, and he did the Aquaman pilot. That's where I've seen him before. So yeah, he's as textbook as it gets for casting the stereotypical look of a superhero. So yeah, that's a no-brainer there, I think. But this episode to me was, I think the cast was decent. I don't think it was off the charts amazing, but I think Hartley does a great job as they love to call him AC, because I guess Art isn't cool enough, but whatever. I'm a Ving Rhames fan. I've loved him since Pulp Fiction, so I liked seeing him in there. Lou Diamond Phillips playing Thomas Curry. I don't recognize the actress that was playing Atlanta, but she was well versed enough from what I could tell. Adrian Palicki played the antagonist in this episode, and this is another one of those scenarios. I like her. I really like her. She's not an amazing actress.
I because of this and Wonder Woman, I was like, she is a bad luck charm. Stop casting her in superhero stuff, because it dies before we even get to see it.
She was in one of the G.I. Joe movies too, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Yep.
She
was on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Oh, yeah. We
It's
don't
like,
talk about that.
it's like, I'm sure she's a lovely person. She's certainly lovely to look at, but she is bad luck. Keep her away from my superheroes.
Anyway, it's another one of those scenarios, especially for a television show versus a movie. I mean, she's perfectly competent, and I don't have any complaints about it. And I can say that about any of the other characters of the show, be it the agent that's pursuing the Bermuda Triangle stuff, which I thought that was actually a pretty clever tie-in to the Atlantean mythology, as making the Bermuda Triangle involved. I don't know that there's a precedent with that in, say, Aquaman comics or anything. If there is, it's not anything I'm familiar with, but I thought that was a clever twist putting it into the TV series, because, you know, Bermuda Triangle, that sort of thing, it amuses me. It piques my curiosity. So
Yeah.
Playing around with ideas like that, I think is really cool. Somebody mentioned today in a discussion that I was having on one of the Facebook groups that the rumor or speculation or what have you was that Ving Rhames' character was somehow going to be tied into Black Manta eventually.
Interesting. I had never heard that, but it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's just people stabbing in the dark or if they've gotten information.
It could be. It could be just
somewhere.
people being like, oh, he's the only black character, so maybe he's related to Black Manta.
I mean, we were all thinking it, right? But anyway. No, I really enjoyed this episode. And again, looking look, I'm a Smallville fan. I enjoy way more of that show than I don't. But let's face it, it had its ups and downs.
Yeah.
And many of the other superhero TV shows that we've dealt with have had ups and downs. You know, I don't have it fresh in the mind, but you know, I've heard people say many things about Birds of Prey, pluses and minuses. Honestly, more minuses than pluses. I don't remember for sure because I didn't watch the whole thing. I only watched like 3 or 4 episodes. And
I still like that too. So you know what? I like everything.
It's whatever. I mean,
what are you gonna do?
You know, my point being is, you know, now that you've explained it, I understand. But as I was watching this today, and even I vaguely remember the first time watching it, this is better than so much of the other stuff that I've seen that's been picked up and put on a television week to week.
Right.
So I've never understood. So, I mean, now that you've explained it, it's kind of sad that the opportunity was missed with the show, but I mean, it is what it is at that point. But I dig it. I really think it's good. I don't know that I'd quite call it great, but I certainly would have watched it every week based on what I saw here.
Yeah, no, I think that we are very much on the same page. It's good. I like it. It's not great. It's not the best thing ever, but it was good, and I would have loved to have watched the show. So I remember when they were making this pilot, I remember being how bummed I was when it didn't get picked up. I was like, oh man, because you're right. At this time, you know, 2006, we were in a bit of a dry spell when it came to superhero live action content. All we had was Smallville at that point. We had just had Batman Begins and Superman Returns, but you know, the MCU hadn't even started yet. This was pre-Dark Knight. So on TV, especially if I was like, oh, I could get 2 superhero shows, Smallville and Aquaman. Oh, I'm so excited. So I remember being really upset. Not really upset. I didn't lose sleep over it, but I was bummed that it didn't get picked up. And then, because it didn't get picked up, you know, there were like rumors that, oh, maybe it wasn't very good or whatever. And, Al Goff and Miles Millar, who worked on Smallville and then also wrote this pilot, they got really defensive of it. They were like, no, it's not that the pilot wasn't good. And so that's why when it eventually became available, it got available on iTunes and it sold very well on iTunes. They felt somewhat vindicated because that everyone's like, oh, it was actually good. And they were like, yeah, we know it was good. It just didn't work out. So yeah, I think that this shows a lot of promise. It's definitely cut more from the Smallville cloth than what we get now. The whole thing of like, you know, how Clark used to always wear the blue shirt and the red jacket. This is sort of the same way. AC spends the whole time in orange shorts and a green tank top. It's the old Smallville. It's like, well, we're not going to put them in a suit, but we'll have them wear the colors. It'll be close enough. And so there was a little bit of that, but it showed a lot of promise, and I was rooting for it then, and I'm glad that we can see it now because, yeah, the cast I think is really good. I think that the way they do Aquaman's powers, at least in the pilot, is pretty effective. I think they set up a lot of threads to pick up on that will carry them through a season or 2 or 3 of television. So there is a lot to like here. I also do remember, though, so what created this pilot is the fact that Aquaman guest starred on Smallville. Do you remember that one?
I do, and it was played by a different actor because he was actually on at the same time Hartley was, I think.
No.
No?
Well, yes, but so
I'm not saying like they were all on the same episode together or anything, but Hartley was playing Oliver Queen at the time this guy was playing Aquaman, right?
Eventually. Not at first.
Okay.
So here's what happened. They had the Aquaman episode of Smallville with Alan Ritchson, who now plays Hawk on Titans. He played Aquaman.
He was much thinner back then, wasn't he?
Well, you get older, you get bigger. And so he played Arthur on Smallville. And I remember being excited because it was one of the very first times Smallville brought in another superhero.
Didn't they call him AC on Smallville too?
Maybe. I seem
to remember thinking that because I thought it was weird that they were calling him AC in this show, and I'm like, isn't that what they called him on Smallville?
They call him AC because he's just so cool.
Like AC Slater, yeah.
Like air conditioning.
I know that. Never mind. Saved by the Bell, is that too late for your generation or what?
No, I got it. Okay. So anyway, Alan Ritchson played Aquaman on Smallville. This was way before Oliver Queen became a part of Smallville. So Justin Hartley was not a glimmer in their eyes at that point. And the Aquaman episode of Smallville became the highest rated episode of that season.
Really?
Yeah. And so they went, oh, people are interested in Aquaman. Huh, cool. And then they started dabbling with the idea of making a show. And they're like, what if Aquaman had a show? What would that be like? And so then they decided, they talked to the WB and they're like, all right, we're going to do a pilot. And again, I remember when this happened. And when I heard that they were not using Alan Ritchson, I was bummed. I was like, why would you not use the guy from Smallville? That would be so cool. Why are you recasting? But they recast with Justin Hartley. And the reason is because they said they didn't want it to be a Smallville spinoff. They wanted it to be its own thing. So even though they saw the potential of the character in Smallville, they didn't want it to be just an extension of Smallville. They wanted to be able to do whatever they wanted with the Aquaman show, so that's why they recast. And so they recast with Justin Hartley, but they brought in a bunch of other Smallville actors on this pilot. So Adrienne Palicki had been on Smallville. The gal who played Eva, her name was Amber McDonald, I think, who I loved, by the way, and she hasn't done much, but I really liked her on this pilot. I don't think she has the most range in the world, but I just liked her.
I would say she's at least on par with most other actors that I've seen in current CW shows.
Yeah, I mean,
and
I would
don't
say
mean that as a slight against anyone. It's just, let's face it, these are not Shakespeare caliber stage actors. They're competent to pretty good television actors, which is fine. That's all they need to be. But I agree with you. I fully agree with you.
Yeah, I really liked her. I think she was super likable. And when we first met her, when she was nailing the sign on the boat and she was just wearing a bikini top, whew, that worked for me. I
am perfectly, wow. Yeah, she's very impressive. And Lord, that smile. I mean, I'm weak for smiles anyway, but that's a glamorous smile that she had.
Yeah, so I was a big fan of hers, and I wish she had done more. Anyway, point is they still brought in some Smallville actors because people who had guest starred on the show that they liked working with, they brought them in to give them jobs on Aquaman, but they recast with Justin Hartley. Then when Aquaman didn't happen, when it fell apart, they liked Justin Hartley, and so when it was time to bring in Oliver Queen to Smallville, they're like, hey, let's call Justin. We liked him as Aquaman, and that show never happened, so now we'll give him this job as Oliver Queen.
Okay. See, I have my timeline backwards. For some reason, I thought Oliver Queen got involved earlier on than Aquaman did in Smallville, but
But then eventually, Alan Richardson came back to Smallville as Aquaman, and then indeed did. At that time, Oliver Queen was around.
I have it in my head, and again, I've only watched every episode of Smallville one time. It's not like it's a show that it's like Seinfeld where I'll watch 6 episodes a week for the last 2 decades. I have it in my mind at one point on Smallville, they almost had a half-assed Justice League formed.
They did. And that was when they brought back Alan Richardson as Aquaman. They had Cyborg, they had Impulse, and they had Green Arrow.
Okay.
And so, yes, at that point, they all interacted. No, in that show, that episode was called Justice. And for me, that was like the best day of my life because I was like, I'm never going to get to see the Justice League in live action, and this is the closest I'll ever get. Little did we know. Times change, but at the time, I was like, yeah, Justice! So fortunately, Alan Richardson got a couple chances to come back. He came back a handful of times on Smallville. And yes, eventually he did interact with Oliver Queen. So the two Aquamen did meet. But that's how Justin Hartley got the job as Oliver Queen, was because he worked with them on Aquaman and then didn't get picked up.
Okay. Well, thank you for straightening out my timeline because I had that completely turned around.
My pleasure. But yeah, so I did think it was a weird choice at the time of like, oh, why wouldn't you just use the guy from Smallville? They didn't, but I guess it all worked out in the end as far as Smallville goes, not necessarily for this show.
Honestly, I remember a lot of pretty negative feedback that CW or whoever got for when the Arrow show came on, that they weren't using Hartley.
Yeah, yep. When they announced it and they announced that they were not making it a Smallville spinoff, yeah, a lot of fans were disappointed. In
fact, I kind of remember I like the guy that played Oliver Queen. Why wouldn't you just use him? I mean, he's not doing a lot else at that time. So yeah.
I wasn't upset, but I also said that I was like, well, why wouldn't you just use him? We already like him. But they're going in a different direction.
Nothing against Amell. I really like Stephen Amell, but
well, yeah, and then I ended up loving Stephen Amell.
And I didn't know who the hell Stephen Amell was back then. So
well, most of us didn't. I guess someone probably did, but same thing. Yeah, we were all, I think he came from a soap opera, so everybody was like, who? He turned out to be great, but yeah, at the time, you'd go, why wouldn't you just use the one you already have? Hindsight. It's a funny thing.
It is.
So yeah,
that shared universe concept could have been so strong way back then, and they just weren't thinking big enough, I guess.
Well, they just didn't want to deal with it, I guess.
Something.
But yeah, so that's why we got kind of a fresh from the ground up Aquaman pilot. And as you said, it's interesting how they structure it with his father not being his real father in this one. So in this one, Arthur is fully Atlantean, and he's been adopted by Lou Diamond Phillips as Thomas. And this is one of the things where like they made him part of the Coast Guard. And you go, okay, I get why you would make him part of the Coast Guard, because like that way he'll always be running into, conflicts and issues on the water that his son can then pop up and help with. Sure. So again, it sets you up for future stories to have him part of the Coast Guard. And I also don't know at what point Thomas became a lighthouse keeper in comics canon. So prior to this, I don't know if he already was a lighthouse keeper or if that was a more recent Jeff Johns thing.
Well, as I was watching this today, I kept thinking to myself that I wonder when they would have revealed in the TV show that McCaffrey was actually Volko.
Mm-hmm.
Or if they would have gone that route, because he was essentially the lighthouse keeper here. So that element was still present, even though it was a different character doing it. It wasn't his father. It was his mentor or whatever you want to call him.
Right. Yeah. And I like you, I love Ving Rhames. And I think Ving Rhames as McCaffrey was a character with a lot of potential. But yeah, it was interesting where he kind of filled the Volko role of being the mentor trainer, and he's in the lighthouse. So that way Tom can be off on the Coast Guard. And I also liked the setup of AC and Eva running this waterfront business of a bar, restaurant, boating, diving lessons, things like that. Mm-hmm. It just gives the whole show a unique flavor that I really liked. I lived in Florida for 8 years. I like the beachside Florida vibe. It's a very unique vibe. Mm-hmm. And so I loved leaning into that just to give this show a much different flavor than what you're used to.
Right. And I have it in my mind that Amnesty Bay is a New England location in the comics. Mm-hmm. And I like that they were smart enough to say, now piss on that, because we can go down here to Florida and everybody can run around in a bathing suit the entire time and, get more people to tune in for that. Because
I did think that too. Yeah, I was like, it's the CW. All of your actors are underwear models, so you might as well have a show where they're all in bathing suits most of the time.
I ain't even mad. I mean, Hartley doesn't need to own a shirt, much like Jason Momoa doesn't. Mm-hmm. So, obviously we already talked about Eva lighting up a screen with her smile, among other things. So, yeah, I mean, Adrian Palicki was doing kind of the same thing as well, even though, she eventually got scaly and evil with things. Somehow that still worked for me. Maybe I'm a sicko. I don't know, but
I get it. I get it.
No,
it's the dangerous gals.
To me, that was a smart choice, because if you have to have a shooting schedule that's not conducive to being clothed like that in New England, in Florida, you don't have to worry about it.
Right.
So, yeah, it made sense to me, even though that was unusual in that I'm not accustomed to Arthur being, Floridian by residence.
Yeah. But it totally makes sense. And
absolutely.
They did shoot it in Miami, so it is, it's legit waterfront Florida, it wasn't Canada stepping in for Florida. But yeah, so it has that too. And it is just smart if it's an Aquaman show, he's got to be out there on the water if at all possible. So I think that was a really smart thing. So the way the show opens is what was interesting is how they did just call her Atlanta, Arthur's mother. And so it's Arthur in Atlanta flying over the Bermuda Triangle. And I want to give at least some context for people who didn't bother watching the episode but still want to hear us talk about it. It sets it up with like young Arthur when he's like 10 years old maybe, and his mom in a plane over the Bermuda Triangle, and all of a sudden there are these water spouts that come up while Atlanta is speaking to her husband Tom, and the plane crashes and the mother gets kind of drug away, and right before she gives Arthur some advice, something about do good with your life, something like that, and there's so much I want to tell you, but do good with your life. And she gets drug away. And so there's this mystery that also I think would have factored into the show as it went, is what happened to my mom? Why did they come after my mom? Who killed her? And they even set that up later on. Like the conversations that AC has with his father is all about, it's been 10 years since mom disappeared or since mom was taken. I need to find out what happened, that kind of thing. So it sets up that mystery to inform future stories down the line. And it really sets up the influence of Atlantis without showing Atlantis or having the money to show Atlantis, which I would think they would eventually get a way to do that, but at least sets up that mystery of Atlantis. So yeah, Atlanta does, well, we assume she's dead, but she gets drug away because she even says something about like, I'll find you again, right? Mm-hmm. Something like that.
Something to that effect, yeah.
So it could be like the movie where we think she's dead, and that's not necessarily the case. She gives Arthur her seahorse necklace that is obviously this Atlantean in nature. And so that's sort of the backstory before we come to the present, where Arthur is, or AC, I just feel weird saying AC. AC
odd, yes.
is working on the boat and is now a young adult. Getting into trouble a little bit, but well-meaning. Did you notice the name of his boat?
I did. The Quint.
I mean, I would assume you. How could you miss it? But yeah, I love that they named his boat Quint. Great nod to Jaws, made me very happy. So yeah, that's the setup for it. And again, it was very obvious that they did it that way, so that way it's something they could revisit as the show went on.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's he's kind of the, I don't know if you want to say environmental activist, but the cops sweating him down on the boat about it. And, he's like, we've got these pictures of you here, because he's trying to deny it. And then eventually he just gets to the point, that water was so filthy in there, I was doing those dolphins a favor by letting them go.
Yeah.
So, I assume that was some sort of a dig at, like, say, SeaWorld and how the animals are treated there. I've never seen blackfish or watched any of that sort of thing, so I don't know. But that felt to me like kind of the commentary that they were going for with with that particular scene.
Right. And I love that. I love that that is what AC would be doing. You know, like he'd still be helping out. He hasn't quite figured out his purpose yet, but he can't help but help, you know, the sea animals. I like how they acknowledge the communication or the empathy between AC and the animals without going too deep in it. Because again, they're like, well, we'll deal with it when the time comes, but we're going to introduce the idea now. Because when Eva talks to him about it, he says, yeah, I felt like they were calling to me. And they use the old, oh, you talking to fish? Like, man, people love that line, right? I feel like we've heard it so much times. And he's like, well, it wasn't like that. I could just sense it. I could feel it.
He actually uses the word, I think what he said, or at least some derivative of it, was it felt more like empathy.
Right.
So yeah, that was essentially his words toward it, not conversational speaking or anything like that.
Yeah. So
one thing I do want to call out before we get too far away from it, because I loved it and I thought, wow, that was a really good sell. The young Arthur, when he was on the plane with Atlanta, they strike that beam of light or water spout or whatever it is that causes them to go down, and of course the water starts filling up in the plane, and Arthur is stuck. He can't get out of his harness. Mm-hmm. And then he's yelling out, "Mom, help me, help." And she comes over and rips that harness off of him. And the look on his face when his mother rips this harness away from him is just like, oh, wow. And I think that kid, just that expression on his face when that moment happened, I think he sold that extremely well.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great point, that they, you acknowledge there's some power there.
It was subtle. I mean, it's one of those things that could be played over the top or blown out of proportion or anything like that just for the sheer spectacle of it. But I mean, it was really more of a subtle moment. And I love the way the kid sold it with just that simple reaction to it with his facial expression.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good point. But yeah, so then we kind of get to see what AC is up to, and you do get glimpses of his power. You don't get much of his strength in this episode, but you definitely get his swimming ability,
which I thought showed extremely well.
Yeah, like surprisingly effective for a CW television budget. I thought it was well done. Some of the CG in this entire pilot, it's a little dodgy, but it's one of those things where you just grade on a curve because you know the source.
Well, I mean, that's
and
just
it still works.
It's a pilot episode for something that would have aired on CW, WB, whatever it would have been called at that time. And you're talking about effects that are some 13 years old now to boot over the top of that.
Right.
So all things considered, what they're working with, I thought the visuals in this episode were very solid.
Yeah, they were pretty effective, especially I think the swimming.
In some spots, absolutely. And for me, particularly with the jet doing the flyover and Arthur kind of chasing her under the water, which I thought was kind of a cool scene, the way they set it up. But that jet,
the fact that he could swim as fast as a jet, that
was great.
It's impressive.
But there were moments you could certainly notice that some television level aged CG was used. But I mean, again, overall, as you say, grading on the curve, I thought it looked really good, especially the swimming stuff that was being done.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, so yeah, you get just enough. Like, they acknowledge that he can sort of communicate with the animals. You can see just how good he is in the water. You can sort of imply his strength, but they don't make a big deal out of it yet. But what I really liked is the way it's set up. He doesn't know who he is yet. He doesn't know he's Atlantean. He just knows that there's this mystery about his mother. He knows that his father's not telling him everything, and so he's intrigued. And that's where you enter McCaffrey, who is Ving Rhames. He is the mentor character, and he's the one who tells Arthur he's from Atlantis. And the way they set it up, though, is like, oh, you don't even know what you're capable of yet. So again, it gives them a place to go from here to explore those powers and to let him start doing way more impressive stuff later on.
Right. And, they're certainly not shy about leading you into his future, because at one point near the end of the episode, Arthur says something to him. I'm not calling him AC. His mom named him Arthur. I'm going to call him Arthur. He says, oh, I suppose I should be doing this while wielding a trident or something or other. And
right.
And McCaffrey's response was, all in due time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they weren't shying away from the stuff. They were just kind of saying, as you said, that we're eventually going to give you this fully developed character and world and everything else.
Sure. Exactly. And you think that they would have gotten there. And I do think that like separating it from Smallville would have allowed them to go a little more full on superhero, instead of sticking with the Smallville playbook. Cause yeah, I would hope that if this show had continued, he would have gotten the trident, he would have gotten the suit, he would have met Mara, he would have taken on Black Manta. I hope all that would have come. But
I don't see a reason they wouldn't have done it, because I don't imagine Warner Brothers would have been as quote unquote protective of Aquaman as they were of Superman.
Oh God, no. And especially at that time, they had no plans for Aquaman. They were like, yeah, you guys want to make a TV show? Sure. We don't care.
Yeah. I figure these creators, Goff and Millar, would have just had free reign to do whatever the hell they wanted with whoever the hell they wanted, as long as Superman, Batman and Wonder Woman didn't show up in an episode.
Right. Yeah, easily. So it would have been interesting. And that is one thing that I like going into where they started to play with the Atlantean mythology. I would have loved to see how deep they went. But for the villain in this episode, it is, as we mentioned, Adrienne Palicki. So she shows up and she's from Atlantis, and we learn that she's a siren. And I love her design when she goes full monster siren. I think that that's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
So you get her as her, and then she can transform, and she attacks AC and more than once, and she is the threat for the episode. So,
and she's the evil version of Madison from Splash. She met him when they were kids, and
yeah.
She says something to the effect, we met years ago or something like that, and she's actually the one that allegedly took Atlanta away from Arthur when they were in that crashed plane.
Yeah,
which was really cool how that was done, by the way.
He should have taken her out for lobster.
Right.
Like in Splash. And maybe things would have gone better.
But that's the thought that occurred to me when they were kind of doing their little skinny dipping moment, which some of that looked a little racy for television.
Yeah, I thought the same thing.
Not that I'm complaining, mind you, but, that's all I can think to myself was, wow, that looks kind of HBO-ish more than CW stuff. But, they had that moment where she kind of like swims off screen, but like right at the tail end of it, I didn't mean to do that. You see the mermaid tail kind of show up.
Mm-hmm.
And at that moment, I'm like, oh God, she's evil Madison.
Totally. But what a way to go. If you got to go with a smile.
I hear that.
I think she's so cool and scary as the siren, and I like that again they were leaning into the creatures of the deep, and I think there was a lot of fun stuff they could have done with that.
And that was also alluded to by I don't remember who said it. I don't remember if it was McCaffrey or if it was the siren or who said it, but it's something to the effect of, you have no idea what kind of like creatures live down here, or something was said along those lines, and all I could think to myself was, wow, they were really going to go all out with that.
Yeah, I think it was McCaffrey. He said something about that. Like he says something about the siren, and then I think he does say like, there are creatures you can't even imagine down there.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Something like that. So no, I think that she's really cool as an adversary, and like their final battle on the Quint out in the middle of the ocean is pretty darn cool, especially like when he comes launching out of the water. Mm-hmm. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I thought it was shot well, and I thought it was, a good action sequence going on there.
Yeah. So that stuff I like. There was another Atlantean who came. I wasn't clear on what his purpose was. He was coming to warn Arthur. I don't know. Maybe?
Well, I mean, he was kind of hanging out in Atlantis apparently, but that was the other thing I thought was intriguing about this whole Bermuda Triangle thing, is the agents were tracking him down because they found out that, I don't know how you fingerprint somebody in 1906. I'm not sure that science quite lines up, but I'll go with it. This guy's been missing for 60 years.
The fingerprints were a match. I'm like, yeah, did they do that back then?
I don't know for sure, but it feels to me like fingerprinting was more like a 60s or 70s idea. I could be way off on that. I don't know.
You just got to go with it.
Right. Anyway, not the point. The point is, this guy's been missing for 60 years and he turns back up, and this, Mr. McGee type of a Fed is investigating these people that have disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle and showed back up, which, was a kind of a neat concept. And I think I'm hazy on it because I watched it like 12 hours ago and my memory's that bad, but I think the siren killed him, didn't she?
Yeah.
Hospital? Okay. Because he escaped from Atlantis and he wasn't supposed to have escaped or something along those lines.
Right, something like that.
And then later on in the episode, as they're kind of winding things down and giving you the teasers for what's to come, the agent holds up a photo of a singer in Cuba in 1936, and it appears to be the female jet pilot that Arthur was racing with.
Right. And so, yeah, I feel like there was this female jet pilot, and she's going to investigate the Atlantean who washed up that Thomas picked up out in the water, and she goes out there, and Arthur saves her. That's when Arthur's swimming under the jet and everything. And whenever we were spending time with her, that was where I was like, why is she in this show? Why am I watching her? Like, what's her point? And she just felt a little extraneous to everything else that was going on. But then, yeah, they kind of introduced that little bit of a cliffhanger at the end of, she, there's more to her than we know. And she disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle, allegedly, years before. And that's where I'm like, okay, like, she's not necessary to this at all. But, hey, they got to squeeze out 23 episodes a season, so they created a new character, and she somehow has involvement with the Bermuda Triangle and whatever.
Again, just to go back to what I said at the beginning here, is the concept of the Bermuda Triangle is one of those things that I generally have something of an interest in. A lot of people explain it with like alien abductions or what like that. So involving Atlantis in this somehow, to me, is a nice touch if played right. I mean, we obviously don't know what the grand scale plans were going to be, but they were clearly trying to play with that idea even further than what they did just in this episode. And I would have been very curious to see how that played out.
Oh yeah, and I do like the idea of the reason that no one's discovered Atlantis is because it's essentially protected by the Bermuda Triangle.
Mm-hmm.
Like that, I think, is a great idea. It's really cool. It makes sense, and it is fun to weave that mythology in with Aquaman.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I dig that. But, yeah, I felt like the pilot and then the secret agent, those are the ones where they're like, oh, they were created for the show because we needed, we just needed more characters to pull stories from. And so I was less interested in them, but I also understand, like, hey, they were trying to set up a TV show.
Yeah,
you need more than just Arthur.
It would have been borderline overly ambitious for this pilot to try and jump both feet in and do, say, what the movie did and introduce Orm and Black Manta and
right.
The Trench wasn't around back then as far as I know. I think they were developed by Johns in the New 52, so that would have been 5 years later. But
right,
you get my point.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been the Trench, but
would have been behind that. But
of course, yeah. Well, and they also, when you're doing a TV show, you've got time. There's no reason to do it all in the pilot. You're like, no,
sure,
we'll get to it. And you see that in all these shows that we watch. They eventually get there, but they're not in a huge rush because they've got time and they've got 23 episodes a year to fill, or sometimes 13, sometimes 11. It depends on the show. Right. So yeah, they certainly would have gotten there, I think, but there was no need to do it all at the beginning.
Plus, it afforded them time to build up budgets or whatever to be able to actually do Atlantis. Because if you introduce Orm in the first episode, obviously you're going to have to, in all likeliness, going by any sorts of traditional measure, going to have to introduce Atlantis along with Orm too. He's not going to be up walking around on land like Arthur's doing all the time.
Right. For sure. And I think it's interesting you mentioned the Trench. Yeah, the Trench wasn't a thing yet when this was made, but I do like the idea of Atlanta was taken away and we're supposed to think killed by the sirens. And so it still serves that same Trench purpose like the movie did. It was just a different take because they didn't have that part of the myth written yet.
Initially, when I watched this episode this morning and that abduction happened on the plane, or when, he killed her, took her, whatever you want to say, I thought to myself, oh God, was the Trench around back then? And that's what this is they're using that character, because I didn't remember Adrian Palicki being the antagonist in the show. I vaguely remember that opening sequence from watching it years ago on the DVD or Blu-ray that I had. But because you see those claws come through the door, and then you see the silhouette of some sort of a fishy-esque monster, abducting her or grabbing her, and that's immediately where my mind went, was the Trench. And then I started thinking, I think the Trench was developed New 52. That was 2011. So, it doesn't quite add up there.
Right. Totally. But it's still,
you're right. The concept.
It's a similar beat. Yeah.
Couple notes I made for it, just, jumping all over the place here. The opening, when they're kind of doing the voiceover thing to introduce you, looks like a Nirvana album cover with that naked kid swimming around.
Oh, okay, yeah.
The sequence where the whale take the unconscious Arthur after the deal in the air and lift him up to the surface there.
Oh, right, yeah.
Kind of reminiscent of Man of Steel, which obviously was, Well, I guess Man of Steel was done like a year and a half before it was actually released. So, I mean, it's still a good 5 or 6 years ahead of it. And very similar in the execution. And I'm not saying it's stolen. I'm just saying it's kind of a cool parallel. And then there's a line, I think it's the cop who arrests him on the boat when he's trying to justify what he did because of the water being so filthy or anything. And he's like, world's full of misunderstood heroes. That's got to be the most meta thing anybody's ever said about Aquaman, because he is really misunderstood by people who just want to write him off as Super Friends version and not give him any credit for anything else,
Right.
So I really appreciated that, especially being more of a recent Aquaman fan as I am.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that like with Smallville and with this show, they, even if neither of these versions really took off, it still showed that there was a lot of great material to mine from the character, which those of us who are fans of the character already knew. But, this is sort of proof of concept of like, yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff there, and it feels really different from what we've seen. So, and that's, I think, the saddest part of this not becoming a TV show, because it had a unique flavor, and it could have explored things that we're not used to seeing. Now we're getting that in the movie, which is great. But, yeah, I think it's a shame they didn't get to go to all the places they probably wanted to with this show.
Yeah. It did kind of make me sad when it was done, because I thought to myself, damn, they could pick this up right now and put it in with the CW stuff and it would work.
I know. I'd have watched it. I still would, but now Aquaman...
He's too big for CW now.
He's too big,
he's
yeah.
Full-fledged. He's the king of DC films now.
He's gotten too big for his britches or his fins.
He rules the land, he rules the sea, and now he rules the box office.
Right.
I'm still not calling him AC.
The other thing we didn't really mention is the fact that his real name is Oren. So I assume that's like an older, like I'm not as familiar with calling him Oren. I've always called him Arthur.
I'm not Aquaman historian person here. I mean, you'd have to hit up like a Daniel Adams or somebody like that. I feel like it's canon. I feel like that was around before. Maybe not so much now, but I feel like I know that from somewhere prior to this.
I know I've heard it before. I know I've heard Oren before, but in all the comics I've ever read, it's always just been Arthur. So I'm sure it's back there in the comics somewhere. I just don't think it was in anything I read. But again, it was interesting to dig back and use that part of the Aquaman story for this.
Agreed.
But, I mean, it all plays into him discovering who he is, and that includes a different name. So I understand why they would do it, because, yeah, I'm sure that was going to be a big part of the show, as him discovering more and more about his Atlantean heritage.
I do need to file one grievance against this episode.
Okay.
You've heard this before, but, I mean, I got to be consistent, right? I never heard Justin Hartley yell out outrageous.
I know, but that was before. This was before Outrageous.
Was it?
Yeah.
I would have thought.
Brave and the Bold. Brave and the Bold was like 08 or 09.
Okay.
So this was even prior to that. So no Trench, no Outrageous, not their fault.
Timeline's almost tonight.
This is before that time. So yeah, there you go. I mean, it sounds like we're pretty much on the same page of this. It's definitely at least interesting to go back and see what could have been. And so if for those folks who have not watched this, I would recommend it. It's good, but it will make you a little sad that you're like, oh, that's a show I'm never going to get to watch.
That's literally my biggest gripe, is being left hanging at the end of the, not getting any kind of carry on from it.
Right. I agree. All right, Jamie, any closing thoughts or last notes that you wanted to make about the Aquaman pilot from 2006?
Are we dropping letter grades here too while we're at it? Or?
Sure. What the hell?
Yeah. I mean, it's worth your 41 minutes of time to watch, guys. I mean, it's quality. I mean, are there things that are suspect to it. Yeah, I mean, any TV show is going to have that, especially a network show, especially a CW type network show. But way more to like here than there's not. There really is. I think it's quality, well done. Hartley was great in the lead part here. Ving Rhames great as McCaffrey, being his mentor or partner or whatever you want to call him. It just 51 minutes well spent, but we've said numerous times, so just one more time to cap it off. It's just saddening that this is where it stops for the particular leg of the adventure. Good stuff. I would watch this again with very little resistance. In fact, I'm sure I probably will watch it again eventually when I'm up and bored and don't have anything else to do. So, I mean, it's just that good that yeah, I mean, it would be a regular rotation watch from me, which is fairly high praise, I would say. Letter grade, I would rate this B+.
All right, nice. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think we're just about the same. I really enjoyed it. I like the cast. I like the characters. I didn't mind some of the tweaks they made to the mythology to make it work for a TV show. I just get why they did that. On this pilot, I didn't need the extra characters, but oh well. I think that the core group was really good, and as Jamie said, Justin Hartley was really great as Aquaman, and I get why when this didn't work out, they gave him another job playing Oliver Queen, because he earned it. He's a talented guy, and he's really good in this, so it's really fun to watch. Just think of it as like a really short movie that we didn't get the sequel to, but there's a lot to enjoy here, and I think that they had a lot of really good ideas for this show, and the biggest sadness is the show didn't happen, so we didn't get to see a lot of that stuff pay off, but it's fun nonetheless. It's still fun to see Aquaman fight a siren with a little bit of help from Ving Rhames. I mean, that right there is worth your time. So I enjoyed it. I think you'll enjoy it too. It's pretty darn good, and again, it is out there. So I agree with Jamie. I'm at a B+ as well. All right, right on. So there you go, 2 B+ for the 2006 Aquaman pilot. And I didn't know what you would think, Jamie, so I'm glad to hear that we watched the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. I'm back when that Blu-ray came out, or DVD, or whichever one it was on. Like I said, I'm pretty sure Crisis on 2 Earth is where it was at. I watched it on there because at that time I was still going through all the special features on those, because they'd always had the featurettes on the next one that was coming and stuff like that. And I watched it and I was thinking to myself, oh God, an Aquaman pilot from these people. I'm sure this is going to be crap. And I remember watching it back then, and even though my memories specifically were hazy, I remember thinking to myself, wow, that was actually pretty good. So now that I've become more of an Aquaman fan and my tastes have altered over the years and what have you, there's not much not to enjoy about it, really.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. And
okay, one more gripe I do have: that logo they had with the Aquaman title at the beginning was really obscure and kind of ugly. With the skulls at the bottom of it and stuff. I mean, it's almost like they're trying to do the Goonies thing or something. I don't know, but I wasn't crazy. I wasn't crazy about the logo.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, and this is the other thing I forgot to mention is that in the show, there's a lot of mention of Mercy Reef, because I guess that's right there in that area. That's where a lot of this stuff happens, Mercy Reef. Mm. And I remember there was rumors that was going to be the name of the show. They didn't want to call it Aquaman because they were afraid it would turn people off, so they were going to call it Mercy Reef. That's
actually in the IMDb information for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, I mean, I remember hearing that then. Like, I'm not getting this from IMDb, so apparently I'm not the only one who remembers hearing that. I think that would have been stupid, like, be what you are, be Aquaman, but interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like Aquaman. I mean, unless you call the show Atlantis, which obviously they shouldn't because they're not there. Smallville is a known commodity. We pretty much, a vast majority of people on this planet know Smallville is Superman's hometown on Earth, right? So It makes sense for them to call that show Smallville when you're showing his beginnings and origins, whatever. Just like, with this Gotham on Fox. I mean, that makes sense. People know what Gotham is and who's there. So, like I say, with Aquaman, unless you're calling the show Atlantis, I mean, calling it Mercy Reef or Amnesty Bay or something like that, I mean, nobody knows what the heck that is. So, it just doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, So who knows how true that was, but I do remember that being a thing. All right. Anyway, cool. The Aquaman pilot. 'Twas not meant to be, but hey, now we've got a movie and everything's all good. So let's do what we always do. Let's check in with you fine folks as we crack open the Wayne Manor mailbox. It's time again for the Wayne Manor mailbox.
You've got mail.
What is a letter for me?
Maybe temporary.
She wrote a letter.
You're one hell of a messenger. Sizzle, Master Wayne.
All right, we're going to do something a little different. And by a little different, just meaning where am I getting these messages from? Because we've had questions from Twitter for the Wayne Manor mailbox, and then I always forget to actually do them when we do this because I just opened the email. And so I'm like, oh yeah, didn't we have Twitter stuff? So I've got to do a few from Twitter first before we get into the emails. This one here comes from Tim Rooney. It says, here's a question for you two. What do you think is Aquaman's defining set piece in the film? Clark has learning to fly in Man of Steel, Bruce has the Martha rescue in Batman vs. Superman, and Diana has No Man's Land. Tim, hello. And good question. So, Jamie, what do you think is Arthur's defining set piece in his film? Like the equivalent of his No Man's Land.
I mean, I've almost got to throw it down to when he shows up in the final battle in the third act. Because at that point, you've got him in full costume. All of his powers are on display and being put to use. That's probably where I'd go with it.
That's exactly where I would go. Yeah. And I actually thought about it in advance. Yeah, it's when he emerges on top, on the back of the Carathan in full costume with all of his powers on full display, and he pulls that trident up to his face, and he commands all of the sea creatures behind him, and he gets all the sharks to turn against the people riding them. Yeah, I think it is. It's that kickoff of that grand finale. I think that's his moment.
We're really simpatico tonight, aren't we?
Yeah, I know. We're so in sync.
Weird. We're synced. It's like our Menzies is lined up or something. I don't know.
I guess so. All right. Oh, this is a trickier one. It's gonna take some thinking. Okay. This is from Super Bob on Twitter. It says your favorite scene for each of the DCEU movies. So for Man of Steel, BVS, Suicide Squad, Wonder Woman, Justice League, and Aquaman, what is your favorite scene? He gave his. Man of Steel, it was Escape from Black Zero. Batman vs. Superman, it was Enter Wonder Woman. Suicide Squad, it was Batman Ruins Date Night. Wonder Woman, No Man's Land. Justice League, Superman vs. The League. And Aquaman, The Trench. Super Bob, it's a good question, but man, it's not an easy one. Jamie, do you want to take a crack at it? Or
yeah. I love pretty much all of Man of Steel, so this is probably the toughest one for me. But the one that always, and I'm not saying other scenes don't have this effect, but like the one thing that always just gets me like up in my chair and ready to rock is the oil rig scene. That music, those drums pounding, him busting through that door when he's on fire, him catching that thing as it's falling down toward the helicopter, and him saving their lives, and how the music is welling up in that moment. Just pure adrenaline to me. I love that scene deeply. And I'm not saying I don't love the fights with Zod or the showdown with Kryptonians in Smallville, or the, you think you can threaten my mother, I think is fantastic. I mean, there's just greatness through and through in that film for me. But to me, that's the one that just stands out above all the other ones somehow, is that oil rescue.
It's a good one. Favorite scene. I'm going to go with flight. I'm going to go with he emerges in the costume and the voiceover, and he takes his first flight. I'm going to go with that for Man of Steel.
And that music cues are so good in that too.
But I agree with you. There's a lot of amazing scenes, but yeah, I'm going to go with that because it's like that was like when we were truly introduced to our new Superman, and it works for me. All right, Batman vs. Superman. Favorite scene.
Martha rescue. The warehouse fight for the Martha rescue. The second place ain't even close.
Yep. Martha rescue. Same. Suicide Squad.
Batman ruins date night. Second place ain't even close.
Oh man, Suicide Squad. I think it's the bar. It's the bar scene for me.
That is a good one. That is a good one.
Like, yeah, I think I just love the character interaction in that scene. So I'll go with that.
I remember sitting there watching it, and again, my best memories of Suicide Squad are my daughter's glorious reactions to seeing Harley on a screen. So, I mean, sentimental place for that movie, for that, just for me. But I remember sitting there on opening night watching that with my entire family, and Batman being on that car and the car getting ready to go off the bridge, and him firing the grappling gun up around the post or whatever it was, and swinging up in the air and in midair, slapping the rebreather in his mouth, and then landed in the water. All of that felt so freaking Batman to me. I loved it so much. So, yeah.
No doubt. Wonder Woman?
The smile that she gives Charlie when she says, "Who will sing for us?"
Oh, okay. For me, it's, definitely No Man's Land. I mean, and then the next 10 minutes that follow that too. Like, that whole sequence is just, flawless.
That smile is actually my favorite moment in the whole film. But if I'm picking a sequence, the Amazons repelling the Nazis on the beach.
Okay.
Or
that
the
works.
Germans, I guess it were. I don't know if they were quite Nazis in World War I. Anyway, you get the point. That sequence for me was the best in the film.
Cool. Justice League.
Kind of a toss-up for me. I really love Batman and the Parademon at the beginning. I really love the super fast motion, slow motion, whatever you want to call it, side eye that he gives Flash. I love a lot about the final battle and how characters are on display there, but I really think my favorite part of Justice League is the opening credits. That may sound silly to some, but I mean, that song and what's going on there and feeling the loss of Superman in society, I think that just was a standout moment in the film.
All right. I would go with probably, the Batman opening. The Batman and the Parademon on the rooftop. Because for me, that's like just comic book Batman in live action.
Yeah, I mean, a great Batman moment. I mean, from the time that thief opens that window and crawls out and you see his reflection as he crouches on the building across the way.
Yeah.
I mean, that looks like it came right off of a panel, dude.
Yeah, exactly. And then Aquaman. He says only one for each, but I feel like you cheated multiple times.
I did. I mean, there's so much about these movies that I love. That's the problem. Aquaman. Anything with Black Manta. I know that's a huge cheat, but damn, I love it.
For me, for Aquaman, I think it's the conversation between Arthur and Atlanta, right before he goes to get the trident from the Karathan. When the a king only fights for his people, you fight for everyone. Like that, I think it's that conversation.
Good character moment. Yeah, great.
All right, we did it. Woo! Good job. All right, this next one is also from Twitter. This is from Mark Grachowski, or Grakowski, maybe? It says, "Hey, Andy, Jamie, listening to your latest episode of Holy BatCast talking about The Dark Knight Rises. My wife's cousin was tragically killed in the Aurora shooting. My wife has watched it recently with my son, and I, like you, separate the movie from the tragedy, and she and I enjoy it. Thank you for discussing it. It's always one movie for me that's hard to grab off the shelf. I do also have a question for you guys. I started again reading comic books after not for about 15, 20 years, maybe longer. Okay. You didn't read comics for 15, 20 years and you've started again. Got it. I'm going back and I'm getting a lot of books I've missed. What are some suggestions? I recently read A Long Halloween and I loved it. I love the show. You guys help get me through my workday." Mark, thank you for the message and thank you for sharing that about your wife's cousin. That is tragic, and I'm so sorry to hear that, and I'm sorry for your wife's loss. As for comics you should jump into, Jamie, why don't you take first crack?
First things first, sincerest condolences to your wife's family. That's terrible, and I'm sorry to hear it. Comic suggestions, I mean, where to begin? Batman stuff, I mean, the easiest way I can tell anybody that's been out of comic for a long time to get caught back up on things is just kind of start in the Rebirth era. With Batman, I would specifically suggest James Tynion's run Detective Comics. If you don't want to go back through all of the 2+ years of that, you can go back about, at this point, 1 month or a little over 1 month and get into Peter Tomasi's run in Detective that just kicked off. I think you can get right in on the beginning of that, which is, I believe, Detective 994, and be fine. You're not going to be lost or miss on anything that came before that, and it'll get you current in a hurry. And it's extremely well done, in my opinion. Obviously, classic iconic titles. I'm always going to say Dark Knight Returns. Batman Hush, I think, is another fantastic one. If you haven't read that, I'd certainly suggest that very highly.
Definitely. Yeah.
I don't know, man. There's so many great ones out there.
Yeah. I co-sign everything Jamie said. I would say the New 52 Aquaman is great. So if you're in the Aquaman mood right now for Batman, I agree with Jamie. Batman Hush is great. Court of Owls is another one that, I feel like has now become required reading. Check out Court of Owls. The other one that I always recommend is Identity Crisis. Identity Crisis knocked me on my ass.
Man, I always forget about that book. It's criminally negligent on my part because it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's so good. So pick up Identity Crisis. Flashpoint, that's a good one that has a beginning, middle, and end, so you can read that. But it also, I feel, is somewhat required reading at this point if we're talking more recent arcs. So yeah, there's a lot out there to enjoy. And I definitely co-sign the Detective run from James Tynion. That one is awesome. So a lot of good stuff.
Are you current on Detective? Are you into the Tomasi run yet?
I think I'm still a few issues behind, so I don't think maybe not.
Because Tomasi's run leading the top of the book since he started had been the road to number 1,000 or whatever. So, I mean, this arc is basically going to cap off right as Detective 1,000 hits the stand. So they're like 999 will be the final issue, and then 1,000 will be like the Action 1,000 where there's just different stories in it. It's probably my guess of what will happen because obviously they've solicited Detective 1,000 and there's 10 freaking covers for that plus retailer exclusives. So it's the same story all over again with the Detective as it was with Action.
That makes sense. Cool. All right. Well, thank you guys for the questions via Twitter. I'm actually going to close the Wayne Manor mailbox at this moment because we need stuff to read for the next episode, which maybe we're not going to wait too long to record. Maybe. Perhaps. And anyway, we're over an hour. It's fine. You guys have other podcasts to listen to. We know how you guys roll. So anyway, we'll close the Wayne Manor mailbox for now, but it won't be long before we answer the rest of the questions in there. If you've got a question for the Wayne Manor mailbox, you can send it via Twitter, but I can't promise I'll remember to read it, but you can. Or if you want to make sure I do read it, you send it to Holy BatCast at rf4rm.com. You can also send a voicemail or leave a voicemail, at 323-366-9246. And the rules for the voicemail are leave your name and make it a minute or less. Please and thank you. But that'll do it for this episode of Holy BatCast. Jamie, always a good time. And thanks for being game for looking back at a little live action DC Comics footnote that is the Aquaman pilot.
Hashtag order Aquaman to full series. I'm going to get that started. I'm going to petition it. I'm going to make it happen.
Kill off Justin Hartley's character in This Is Us. It's not too late.
I mean, he's got a drug problem. It wouldn't be hard to do at this point. So, I mean,
listen, I don't know much about that show, but I know that everybody dies, so
they do.
Why not him?
A really good show. I would miss him on the show. I actually love his character on the show, but that's another story. Between him and Sterling K. Brown, man, stop. Just quit, guys. Stop.
Cool. All right, Jamie, if the folks at home want to keep up with you, where can they do that?
I'm on Twitter at BatRaider3960. I'm floating around various real fans groups on the Book of Face, and generally hosting podcasts or co-hosting, or being dragged along on podcasts, tugging on shirt tails, doing that sort of thing.
Keeping out of trouble.
Yeah, that.
Sweet. All right. Well, yes, please do follow Jamie and also follow the show. Thank you, as always, for joining us for the show. Thank you for downloading the show. Please do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Please rate and review us on iTunes. And as Michael Keaton's Batman says, I want you to tell all your friends about me. Visit holybatcast.com. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, Holy BatCast, or find us on Patreon, patreon.com/holybatcast. Again, got an email you want to send to the Wayne Manor mailbox. That is holybatcast@rf4rm.com, or you can leave a voicemail at 323-366-9246. But that'll do it for this episode. On behalf of Jamie, I've been Andy. This has been Holy BatCast. We will see you next time. Same bat time, same bat channel.
Holy BatCast is brought to you by real fans for real movies. Remember, the thoughts and opinions shared by the participants are theirs and theirs alone, and do not represent the companies or organizations they happen to work for.
Look, you're under arrest for breaking and entering.
You want to know the real reason why I freed those dolphins? Because I felt like they were calling to me.
What are you saying? You can talk to fish now?
Dad, I went from holding my breath for 5 minutes to being able to breathe underwater. I can swim faster than a cigarette boat at full throttle. How do you explain any of that?